Thank you again to Ontario Creates for presenting the session and the Framing of the Future series. To begin today's discussion, we have a brief presentation from Julie Arbit, who is the Global Senior Vice President of Insights at Vice Media Group, and Lauren Greenspan, who's the Senior Director of Insights North America at Vice Media Group as well. Their report, The Future of the Creative Workforce, developed in collaboration between Vice Media Group and Ontario Creates, identifies Generation Z and Y professional interests and awareness of the creative jobs and opportunities available to them, and how we can provide opportunity and push creativity forward in the future. So I'm going to pass it off to the two of them first, and then I will be back after their presentation to introduce the rest of our panel, who will be expanding on their research. So welcome, Julie and Lauren.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. So we are so excited to join you today and share our learnings with all of you. The last 18 months have been this real inflection point, right, felt around the world. It's been a time marked by disconnection and social and political turmoil, but we're also entering this new era, an era of cultural renaissance that's going to be marked by this explosion of creativity. And this is an extremely exciting time for young Canadians working in the creative industry, with so many opportunities and innovations ahead of them, but they're also faced with many challenges as they navigate this really unprecedented moment in their careers. So we conducted this research in collaboration with Ontario Creates to understand what is needed to help young Canadians adapt to this new world. In the summary we're going to share with you today, we'll highlight the skills young creators need in their toolkit to grow and thrive, and we'll identify how to support those working behind the scenes whose roles are so critical to pushing creativity forward.
So a quick note on how we approach this research. We conducted this in early 2021. We began first with in-depth interviews among a group of young creators, as well as a group of young creative business leaders across various creative industries in Canada, so that we could better understand how to support both groups going forward. Using these learnings, we then ran an online survey among 1,000 Canadian Gen Z, which we defined as 18 to 24 years old, and young Gen Y, which we defined as 25 to 30 years old, to gauge interest and awareness in career opportunities, specifically behind the scenes.
Great. Before we get into the specifics on the creative workforce, I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and look at how these young generations, Gen Z and young Gen Y, they approach work differently than previous generations did. I mean, to start with, their definition of a success has shifted. So success to them is no longer about what they do, it's about who they are. It's intrinsically tied to their identity. And young people's identity is all about their personality, their values, and their passions. And it's expressed through all areas of their life, right? And that includes what they do for work and the markers of career success. You know, these young generations are really focused on doing what they love and doing work that matters to them above all else, right? Success is a really well-balanced life, it's personal fulfillment, and the freedom to pursue their passions. Another difference in how young people approach their careers is their openness to experimentation and fluidity. They don't really feel the need to find or stick with a single career industry. They actually expect to have multiple jobs and even multiple careers over the course of their lifetime. Side hustles provide further opportunities to experiment, explore, follow their passions. And what we're seeing in creative fields is this fluidity can even be more pronounced.
Some other shifts we're seeing are around the areas of work-life balance and diversity in the workplace. So young people do want to do work that they're passionate about. As Julie just mentioned, work does play a big role in their identity, but it's by no means everything. And for the cohort working in a creative industry, nearly 8 in 10 said that work-life balance matters to them. But in these fields, that might look a little different than what we think of as the traditional definition. It doesn't necessarily mean working 9 to 5 with evenings and weekends free, but still they need to find pockets of balance and downtime whenever possible. For creators specifically, work-life balance might be a little more blurred because they're often getting paid to do what they love. Still, they're aware when they're engaged in their passion for work-related purposes versus for their own personal enjoyment. Finding work-life balance for those employed behind the scenes might be a little more deliberate. This group might seek balance as more of a priority because they do want to have time to pursue their passions, which might be different from how they spend their workday. When it comes to diversity, one more note on diversity, it's really critical for young people that their workplace reflects the backgrounds and experiences of the real world that they live in and create in. Many have told us that we heard that progress has been made in terms of representation and diversity across creative fields, but there's still some work to be done in terms of action and accountability. Some ideas we heard are recruiting new talent from non-creative industries, actively building a diverse team, and creating programs that support underserved populations are just some ideas that companies and individuals can take action to continue moving this progress forward.
Young people are going to be leading the creativity of the future, right? 3 in 5 young people consider themselves creative. And this is, there's incredible interest in the creative workforce among both Gen Z and Gen Y. Right? They're really drawn to this career path on both ends of the spectrum, whether they're creators themselves or they're fueling creativity behind the scenes. And this high level of interest isn't surprising in these fields. They align really well with how they define themselves and how they view success. They're drawn to these creative career paths because they allow them to pursue their passions and express their identity. All right, so let's start with the creative roles. To succeed in creative roles today, there's a unique set of skills required. So a big shift from previous ways of working, is the need for this broad skill set. So for example, someone who shoots videos expected to be versed in how to market that content. A writer may need to have a firm grasp on social media to be discovered. And whether they're creating content for their own audiences or for an outside client, creators are really feeling the pressure today to do it all. The biggest knowledge gap we heard for creators of all types is business know-how. In many cases, they don't have the infrastructure of a corporation for support, and this type of training is not necessarily endemic to their chosen fields. So their business knowledge needs can differ depending on the industry or type of project they're working on. It can range from pitching and marketing to financial advice. And some of the needs that they have, are more tactical, like just how to invoice clients. Lastly, the grant system for creators in Canada can also be a mystery. Right? While the grant system is viewed as a huge benefit to creating content in Canada, many creators need technical help navigating this really complex system. They mentioned there's a notable lack in understanding, how they might qualify and how to stand out in the application process. And some told us they simply need help of knowing where to begin and which grants apply to them. Because the skills are so unique, they often turn to really non-traditional places for support. So when it comes to education, it's about getting the knowledge and qualifications necessary to accomplish their goals, really whatever that takes. And this may not come from a traditional 4-year degree. Hyper-focused programs that are really specific to the creators' areas of focus are believed to be even more helpful today. And many of their skills are actually self-taught. So creators deepen their skill set through public resources found online, especially YouTube. We heard the phrase YouTube University a lot during this research. And these young generations are really using the digital savvy they have to build their knowledge and pave the path to where they want to be. So another really important element we heard from the young creators we spoke to was the importance of community. Creators need a community to truly thrive and be able to reach their full potential. And they think the bigger that community, the better. Community can often support guidance. Many times they're looking for mentors with similar background or experiences to be able to provide practical advice that's tailored just to them. And community is also how these creators get projects and find new work.
Now I'll take you through a deeper dive in roles behind the scenes of creative industries. So we asked Gen Z and young millennials what they knew about specific positions that exist behind the scenes in creative industries. And our research found that there really is some work to be done to raise awareness in terms of the breadth and depth of the opportunities that are available here. So the pink bars on this slide indicate awareness levels, while the yellow bars measure interest levels. As you can hopefully see, there are only 2 roles, that of sales and editor, that have an awareness level above 50% for young people. Now, among those aware, many do show interest in pursuing such a career. Interest tends to be slightly focused on hands-on roles that directly shape creative content, such as editors or producers, with some slightly less interest in sales. We also found that males are more familiar with behind-the-scenes roles and more interested in these job opportunities. There was not a job type where interest was significantly more female, and this was consistent across Gen Z and Gen Y. So a gender gap is not anything new, but we wanted to make sure to call that out here because the systemic issue is still impacting these fields for a new generation entering the workforce. So as more young people consider behind the scenes careers and enter those, there's a real opportunity to build awareness among young women, especially about all of the viable career opportunities available to them. And when it comes to the skill set for behind the scenes roles, we heard that these kinds of jobs often entail working across all different types of projects and teams, which can really require a robust and broad skill set. The most important skills we heard were to have today are personal skills, that being creativity, adaptability, flexibility, problem solving, and organization. Notably, these kind of softer skills are also areas where young people feel they could benefit the most from further training. We heard that education around technical skills like social media and digital marketing are a little less needed for this group. And of course, knowledge that is specific to their profession is also important. But we heard that behind the scenes professionals largely hone those types of skills through hands-on experience at work, rather than formalized education or other types of professional training. And finally, this broad skill set needed and lack of awareness and opportunities really make these behind the scenes jobs pretty complex to navigate, especially to someone starting out in their early career stages. So regular, consistent guidance from industry insiders in the form of mentors is really key to a successful career in this field. However, finding that mentorship connection can be really difficult. In fact, it's one of the main roadblocks young people face when trying to enter into this type of a job. And rather than turning to mentors, they're still looking where they might be most comfortable, digital sources for career development, job opportunities. So there's a real gap that can be bridged here that could be really beneficial to especially early career success for these roles.
So throughout the research, there were some really important themes that came up that we want to leave you with today. First and foremost, the approach to attracting and retaining creatives and those behind the scenes need to reflect the values of these young generations. So we need to communicate how young people can incorporate their passions into different positions, especially where this might not be as obvious, such as the behind the scenes roles we've been talking about. And we need to champion community. Right? We need to both ensure that everyone feels welcome and included and feels supported as they navigate this often complicated industry. And we need to embrace the non-traditional means of support as these generations really blaze their own path in everything from education to the culture of work. So with all that said, we're really looking forward to hearing from all the panelists about their experiences in the creative workforce. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Julie and Lauren for providing us with that information. Julie and Lauren are going to stick around and they will be back towards the end of the conversation today when we have some time for audience questions. So if you have any questions for Julie and Lauren, please put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel who are going to be expanding on some of the concepts that Julie and Lauren just introduced. So if you'd like to learn anything more about today's speakers, we've included a link in the chat with their full bios. But first we have Perry Luden. Perry currently manages the Real Opportunities program at Real Canada, which offers free workshops designed to inform youth nationwide about the many career opportunities in the Canadian film industry. She's passionate about bringing communities together through the transformative power of the arts and making it accessible for all. Next, we have Rebecca Love. Rebecca is a Toronto-based filmmaker, writer, visual artist, and community organizer. She has produced 8 short films focusing on love, illness, and neighborhoods. Welcome, Perry. Welcome, Rebecca. Next, we have Varun Raj Gandhi. Varun is a picture editor who began his career editing digital media promos for Disney Studios in LA and later edited promos for a big budget VFX film in India. Since 2019, he has worked as an assistant editor in Toronto with clients such as the NFB, Scott Brothers Entertainment, and Tier A DGC Productions, and is currently wrapping editing on a CBC Originals documentary based on the life of Toronto Raptors superfan Nav Bhatia. Welcome, Varun. Next, we have Zareen Bushra. Zareen is a South Asian actor and filmmaker, as well as the director of operations for the Future of Film Showcase, where she works extensively to build numerous industry workshops and developmental programs for young and emerging filmmakers, and especially those from BIPOC and LGBTQ+ community. She now works as the director of branding and marketing at Bay Pictures, as well as a programming coordinator at Real World Film Festival. Welcome, Zareen. And I will pass it off to our moderator for this session, Erin Smith, who is the Manager of Research and Strategic Planning at Ontario Creates. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome.
Hello. I'm going to start off with the kind of big question. The research that VICE conducted covered some big topics. So I do want to talk a little bit about your own careers and thoughts around the culture of creative work, and then move the conversation on to some questions that tackle some of the career development and behind the scenes roles that the report also addresses. One of the findings in the report, and also among other research that looks at the relationship between sort of Gen Z and Gen Y and perception around careers and work, is the idea that success is no longer about what you do, it's about who you are. I think this speaks to a larger societal shift in values among generations, where for Gen Z in particular, success seems to be defined increasingly less by the traditional notions of like the size of your paycheck, and more about your impact on the world and a sense of personal fulfillment. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the work that you do, how you ended up on your career or work path, and then how you personally define success for yourself, and whether, whether what you do sort of ties into your values as a person. And maybe I'll ask you all, but we'll start with Perry.
Thanks so much, Erin. Happy to be here. Wow. Okay. So I guess I'll start with defining what success means to me personally at this point in time. It's changed a lot throughout my life, but I would say right now it's sort of a trifecta of doing what I love, doing what challenges me, which might not be something that I love at the moment because you might not get the instant gratification, and also something that creates a positive impact for my community, for event attendees, if it's organizing an event. And I would say that I came to this career path in a sort of informal way. So what I do currently is I manage the Real Opportunities program, as Katie mentioned. So we organize virtual workshops across Canada right now, and we connect with youth facing barriers to showcase them all of the opportunities that are available in the Canadian film and television industry. And the responses we have gotten has been incredible. We've gone virtually to small towns in Alberta and have had, teachers say that they wouldn't have been able to meet, a props master from North Bay otherwise, so it's through this program that we can show folks across the country that, these are viable career paths. This is something that if you're passionate about, these are the ways you can reach it. And I would say that it's really important to continue raising awareness about this and create similar opportunities, especially for youth, because, at a young age, you're not sure which path to take, college, university, internships, all of that. And to give youth, especially BIPOC, the tools available so that they can follow their passions, even if maybe they don't see enough of themselves being reflected on screen, that we hopefully change that for future generations to come.
Thank you. And that raises a good point. I definitely want to talk about sort of the importance of seeing yourself reflected in some of these industries in terms of career opportunities. So we'll definitely loop back around to that later on in the discussion. But Rebecca, would you mind talking a little bit about what you do and sort of how you define success for yourself?
Sure. So I'm a Toronto-based writer, director, and producer. I got into filmmaking as a teenager when I realized that filmmaking is sort of the most engaging way to get a message across to a large group of people. And at 18, I was diagnosed with a very serious health condition. And then at 24, I was diagnosed with a second very serious health condition. So filmmaking for me became a way to really sort of engage with the world and with a community after very long stretches of recovering and being quite isolated and removed from other people. So success to me, wow, that's such an interesting question. Success to me, like, it doesn't necessarily mean acceptance into fancy film festivals or press pieces in prestigious publications or money, or like, for me, it means, I guess it means making contributions to important conversations, and maybe changing your audience's perspectives, even if you have just like a tiny little audience, trying to change the way people think. For me, my illnesses have really shaped the way I view myself. So definitely living a life where I get enough sleep and where I feel healthy, and maybe where I'm trying to maybe advocate for other people who live with disabilities or health conditions. Yeah, I think all of those things to me are what makes success.
Thank you for sharing that. Varun, what about you?
I fell in love with picture editing when I was growing up in India. I was lucky to be part of, directing short films. But when I saw what picture editing could do, how it could transform storytelling, that's when I fell in love with the art form. And I ended up starting film editing further. And as for success, how I define success would be, I feel that success is not only balancing personal and professional lives, but also choosing to be happy, like, irrespective of what curveballs life throws at you. If you can choose to be happy and grateful, then you're successful. That's what I've learned over the past few years that I've been, working as an assistant editor and as an editor.
Thank you. And last but not least, Serene.
Hi. So it's a bit of a roundabout story for me for how I got into film. I was always really into movies and the creative industry, but I went to business school and thought I would kind of be okay doing more businessy aspects. And then halfway through realized that I definitely did want to pursue a more creative career. So I took film courses with special permission and just loved it immediately, because I had done a lot of theater, I'd done a lot more creative stuff, but more as hobbies, and I realized that was what I wanted to do by the end of it. And once I graduated, I got my first agent and sort of just started working on sets and have been in it ever since. Success to me, I guess, mimics what a couple of the other panelists have said. It's just being comfortable in my life and not feeling the stress of being really financially insecure, but still being able to do work that I find meaningful and that I find like really contributes to the society that I'm in, because that's always been a really important aspect of pursuing work for me, is just doing work that feels like it's having an impact on something somewhere, even if it's not as grand as changing a billion people's lives, but just feeling like it's making even a little bit of a difference, while at the same time being able to support myself through it. So that doesn't really necessarily have to mean becoming a millionaire, but it's just like, am I able to live off of what I do while still feeling like I'm making a difference?
Okay, so you all have deeply interesting jobs and careers. I'm super impressed by the sort of work that you're doing. I want to talk a little bit about something that came up in the report, the idea of both a side hustle and the fluidity of careers. So Zareen, you talked a little bit about sort of moving from a business degree into a more creative field, but wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of a side hustle. And I'm curious about sort of what you think, either from your own experiences or maybe even those of your peers, but wondering if you would see a side hustle as a way to sort of support yourself while you're on the road to pursuing a more creative job or a creative passion, or whether, if this idea of the side hustle is transitional. So you'll have, a job to support yourself for a while, but then you hope that you'll be doing creative work for kind of the rest of your life, or whether you think it's sort of, this is the society that we're in where compensation for work is kind of out of alignment with the cost of living, particularly somewhere like Toronto, where you might actually see a side hustle as necessary to just earning enough to live and do some sort of creative work on the side. So feel free to jump in if any of you have any thoughts about that.
So I think it very much depends on what your goals are. I don't think a side hustle should be necessary to be able to sustain yourself, but if that's something you want to do, you should be able to do. For example, I have friends who have more traditional jobs, but want to keep acting as more of a part-time thing, that because like they want to focus more on building their family and just being more stable, and they don't want to jump straight into the creative industry, which is a little bit more unstable. I think that's a very valid place to be in if you want that creative aspect to be more of a side hustle thing. But I also think for me personally, the side hustle is definitely transitional, because I do want to make the creative industry a full-time thing for myself. So I think it very much depends on the goal that you have specifically and what capacity you want to work in the industry for. However, in terms of the necessity of a side hustle, I think it's unfortunate right now that you almost have to have multiple jobs to be able to sustain yourself. I don't think that should be the case. I think you should be able to pursue what you want creatively and still be compensated for that. Whether you choose a more traditional field or whether you stay in the creative field, I don't think you should have to have 4 jobs to be able to just pay rent and be able to put food on the table. And I think we're starting to sort of create this really bad environment where it's almost glorified if you have 4 jobs that you're doing all the time and you're not getting sleep and you don't eat, and you're like, yeah, I'm so like, I never sleep. And I don't think that should be the goal that we're striving for. I think we should definitely try and move away from the idea that we need to have multiple jobs that we're working constantly just to be able to sustain yourself as a creative.
Anyone else have any thoughts that they want to share on that? I think you brought up something interesting about sort of the idea of productivity and the need to be doing something at all times to sort of be considered productive or be viewed as productive, which is, potentially a dangerous notion in terms of a work-life career balance. Maybe I'll move on to my next question. I'm really interested in some of the skills and training that you have that sort of led you down these career paths. The research talked a little bit about sort of traditional education, college degrees, or training programs, but also the value of more informal training. So the idea of using YouTube or finding internships or mentorships. So wondering if you could each talk a little bit about the skills and training that you received to get here, and sort of what was most valuable to you, and interested on your takes on whether that was something like your school degree or something more untraditional. And maybe I'll start with Varun.
Sure. So I went to film school for 3 years. It was a master's program in picture editing. It was great. I learned a lot, met a lot of good people, found my first job. But, film school, at least my film school, trained me to be an editor. And it's important to realize that coming out of film school, it is not necessary. It's rare that you would immediately get hired to be an editor. You are to in most cases, you would start off being an assistant editor. So that's the reality of it. And then people need to know that assistant editor can be a very misleading term, because assistants often have a very different responsibility. It's very different from what editors do. Although it's something, whatever they do helps editors, that's why it's called assistant editing. But it's a very different skill set, and my film school did not teach me to be an assistant editor. So that's something that I picked up while working. Practical hands-on experience after graduation is where I picked up those skills. And also, after I moved to Toronto, I was lucky to be connected with the Canadian cinema editors and DGC, which helped me, get onboarded with the Canadian Cinema Editors Mentorship Program and making the right connections over there. Those are the things that helped me pick up those skill sets that assistant editors require, because that's often your entry point to building a career as a picture editor. I hope that, yeah.
It does. And I am curious about to ask you too all about whether there are sort of some gaps in your skills and training session that you sort of now that you're working, that you realize it would have been great to learn sort of the finance or accounting side of things. and didn't. Rebecca, what about you in terms of your skills and training? What was most valuable to you?
Sure. So I started off like I was a camp counselor at a theater arts camp for a number of years throughout my high school. And then I did my first year of university at the University of King's College. I did a program called the Foundation Year Program where we looked at the history of storytelling in the Western canon from the Epic of Gilgamesh all the way to Samuel Beckett. So we're really focusing in on stories for that year. And then I went to Ryerson for film production for a 4-year undergrad. And then I did a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of Guelph for 2 years. And then through that program, I did a mentorship with Kazakh Radwanski, which was incredible. And I also have kind of an informal mentorship with Adam Agoyan. So between all of these experiences, I love writing stories, and I love production design, and I love blocking and working with actors. And between Kazakh and Adam, I really have learned how to lead a team. And so there are lots of those skills. You know, conflict resolution is huge. When you're leading a team of 50 people, you need to learn how to resolve little conflicts, big conflicts, networking, learning how to find people you want to work with. That's really challenging. It's challenging. You don't necessarily learn that in film school. That's more you learn through time, through working with enough people, but that's a skill set that I've really tried to fine tune in the past couple of years. Also, another thing is learning how to discern between opinions that you want to listen to and opinions that you want to ignore. When you're making a film, you might have dozens of people sharing their thoughts about what is good art, what is a good story, what is a good actor to cast, you know, and you need to be able to decide who do you want to listen to and who do you not want to listen to. Those skills, networking, hiring your collaborators, and listening whose opinions to, like, those for me are the top things, and conflict resolution. In terms of blind spots, definitely film business. It's finance and accounting, taxes, because I produce a lot of my own work. I work with producers, but I often am one of the producers. And I have enormous blind spots on all of these fronts. So if I could go back to any kind of school, this is probably what I would try and focus on, is learn how to run the business side of things.
When you have a blind spot, are there sort of resources that you turn to in order to sort of help you through like a challenge, or, you know, filling out a part of a grant application or something?
Sure. So with both like grant applications and with running a production company, I actually try to run sessions where I invite lots of people. Like for grant writing sessions, for example, I invited 8 people into my living room, and I invited someone I knew who was an expert at grants, and we did like a whole session, and we like taught each other how to write a grant. And with production companies, running a production company early this January, I'm hoping to run another session like this to just bring someone, like, people are very generous with their time, and it's a community where people like to help each other out. So yeah, there are ways to teach as a community. You know, we're all constantly learning and growing, and we can all learn from one another, which is great.
Zareen, what about you?
So I know it's funny because I still did go to business school, but I specialized in marketing. So I think in terms of blind spot, it's very similar to Rebecca. I have no idea how taxes work. So once I transitioned more into the creative field of like filmmaking and actually being an actor, it still kind of is a really big blind spot for me to figure out how to do taxes. Same thing with grants. I didn't know where to find any information about how to apply to grants, what grants were even available that were there to be used by emerging filmmakers. So I realized that even though I went to business school, film business specifically is very different. So whether you learn about regular accounting and things like that, like, yeah, you can make your production budgets to have to do with that. But when it comes to licensing, other production aspects, film business is super, super specific. And I think that definitely is a blind spot for me, because a lot of my training obviously focused on more creative aspects, whether it be acting classes or classes on directing and just screenwriting, things like that, and not enough on how do you actually get your things made, because it's obviously one thing from the perspective of an actor to just get your agent, you audition, you book the role. But when I started wanting to transition more into directing and making my own stuff, I realized the roadblock I was facing was that I genuinely didn't even know where to begin to have the funding to start.
Yeah, it's it seems to be a real challenge. Perry, for you, what was your path to Real Canada like?
Yeah, so at first, to be honest, I was always involved in some way with project managing, whether it was watching it, like my uncle owned a banquet hall when I was younger, so I would always see the conferences and concerts and weddings that he would organize, and it would always have some sort of element of the arts in it. And I thought it just looked so amazing to see how many people were brought together, and not only that, but seeing how much was involved in the back end to create events like that. So throughout school and university, I was always in some sort of project managing role, like running events for my program. So I studied music at McMaster. And then I was struggling to see what kind of position would even exist, where like there would be a mix of the arts and what I love, which is project managing. And I ended up going to Humber's Arts Admin and Cultural Management program. I do want to apologize if you hear construction. There's some like construction going on, so let me know if it's annoying. But that was a 7-month program, postgraduate program that I took, and it was like the best decision I made to embark on this career path. We learned everything from cultural policy, HR, revenue development. We learned how to write grants. There was a guest speaker once who came and taught us how to do our taxes, which was amazing. And yeah, we really felt taken care of in that program. The program coordinator, Anne Frost, was a really wonderful resource to have and a mentor afterwards to keep in touch with us as we were trying to find our career paths. And alongside my love of event management, I really loved film. As someone who immigrated to Canada at a young age, I relied on film to understand what this language is that everyone's speaking here and all of that. And learning about the wonderful vault we have here in Canada with our Canadian films and the rich film industry we have, and now having the chance to organize events where we have guest speakers from the industry speaking with students about the day in their lives and what they do. It really feels like a dream. So, and thanks to Humber's program, I feel like it did give like a really great ground base on all the different skill sets I should enhance or learn. And now those folks that were teaching us at the program are now my network. So it was a really great program, and I would recommend anyone who's interested in this sort of realm to definitely look into that.
Thank you. Anyone ever use YouTube to learn how to do something related to your careers?
Not yet.
Me, yes, because like I didn't go to film school, so for so much of it, I just relied on YouTube to figure out what certain like terms were before I went on set, and like because it was more about like photography for me, because earlier on I kind of delved into photography as a side hustle, so I would use YouTube to learn all of that, but that kind of transitioned into film as well. But yeah, when I didn't go to film school, so that was my film school, was just YouTube.
Yeah, but I rely on YouTube every day. Even now, I still rely on YouTube because, as an assistant editor, I'm working, and then the editor wants a particular effect or maybe a temp VFX. You want to find something with green screen and you want to replace that in some shot. And then you find all those assets on YouTube. Or sometimes you just learn something, because there's just so much material and you can keep learning. So often it's just a quick Google search, YouTube search, you find something and then you implement that in your workflow. And there you have it. So yeah, YouTube is something that I still rely on every single day.
Yeah.
So I want to touch back onto something that Perry brought up at the beginning. We funded another study with Vice a few years ago, and one of the findings of that study was it was around how Gen Z consumes content. And one of the findings was that they find that the content that they are consuming does not reflect the diversity of the world they see around them, and that they would like the content, both the content and also the people that make that content, to sort of reflect that world more. The Vice research that you saw today talked a little bit about how women are less likely to know even about opportunities in the creative industries, particularly behind the scenes. And then, the data that we have so far, it demonstrates that Canada's cultural industries really are kind of lagging in terms of failing to reflect the diversity of the world we live in. And Perry and I were chatting a little bit by email before today's session, and she brought up the challenges of entering a workforce where you don't necessarily see yourself reflected in that workforce, and how that can lead to feelings of imposter syndrome. Perry, I'll start with you, but I'm wondering if you would mind talking a little bit or sharing a little bit about your experiences and maybe how you've tackled some of those roadblocks.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, it's like you said, I think especially for women of color, we don't really see ourselves. So it's hard to imagine ourselves in that position. And for a while, it was hard to also follow my passion in this field because of that. So I think what I would say is that that organizations need to practice genuine allyship, because especially in this day and age, it's easy to, post something or even just say something, type something, and not have actionable items behind that that's truly going to make an impact. If you have job postings, going to the communities rather than expecting them to come to you, for example, and being open to having conversations about how white supremacy might come up in any workplace, in a school, in everyone's lives. And if the conversation feels comfortable, then it's not genuine. So just being honest about being as inclusive as possible and having genuine representation, as well as support for the BIPOC folks who are working at any organization.
Anyone else have anything they want to share, or have any ideas for something that the creative industry companies could do now that might remove some of those challenges or roadblocks for underrepresented groups who are looking for opportunities in creative industries?
I think it's exactly what Perry said. It should less be about how can we use people of color to benefit our brand, and actually how do we benefit people of color? Because I think with this new trend of diversity and representation, all it's becoming is how can companies now capitalize off people of color to fulfill their own brand desires and the goals that they have for their own marketing. And I think it comes down to supporting brands or working with organizations that are doing actual work to create more opportunities for people of color. So in my own personal experience, when looking for an agent, for example, instead of just trying to find an agent who was like, yeah, like you're South Asian and that means you're going to get a lot of roles now because that's trendy. It was important for me to find an agent who didn't think of it in the terms of you're marketable, but more of what were they doing to actually make an impact in the industry to change what it currently was for actors of color. And same with the organizations that I currently work with, which is Fate Pictures, Real World, and Feature Film Showcase. All three of those organizations have like the forefront of their mandate is to center people of color and creatives of color, not just in the sense of just putting them on billboards or putting them on the front of the screen to be like the face that represents a company that might not be supportive of people of color, but working from completely bottom up to create opportunities for people of color in the industry across the board. And the only way that I think you can really do that is to center those people and listen to what they have to say and fund the projects that they want to make, instead of kind of having a billion white producers attached to a project that might star a person of color. So it's like, yeah, that's technically representational and diverse, but how is that working backwards? And ensuring that the stories that are being told are actually putting people of color on the forefront in every facet and every aspect that you can.
Thank you for sharing. I think we're just at 2:45 now, so I think we're going to welcome Lauren and Julie back and then move into the audience Q&A portion. So if you are watching this panel and have any questions, feel free to include them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And welcome back, Julie and Lauren. And we do have one audience question so far. Someone is asking what you would recommend to someone seeking a mentor if they're new to the field and have little to no formal training. So maybe I'll start with Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind talking about how you were able to build some relationships with mentors.
Sure. So Kaz Krodwanski was my mentor through the University of Guelph. So that was through a university program. It was built into the master's program. But I would say if you're looking for a mentor figure, to not be afraid to just ask people out for coffee. That's like, I think people, filmmakers, producers, directors, cinematographers, editors, can often be a lot more receptive and inviting to that kind of thing than you might think, and to just not shy away from reaching out. Or if you see someone at a screening, just maybe go up and approach them and introduce yourself and see what might come of that. I would say, yeah, just don't be shy. Just put yourself out there as much as you are willing to.
Anyone else have a relationship with a mentor and want to talk about sort of how they made that connection?
Sure. I was lucky to be, a regular participating member of Canadian Cinema Editors, and I applied to their inaugural mentorship program, and they connected me to a great mentor in the industry, Shelley McLean, who has really played an important role in my initial days in Toronto, getting used to the world of post-production and the expectations on assistant editors, and especially it had happened at a good time because it was just before the pandemic hit, after which networking became even more difficult, right? So it was at a good time where I could meet a lot of people and learn about the basics requirements of the skill, and created a roadmap for myself going forward. So yeah, mentor. Even if I wouldn't have had this mentorship opportunity, I just felt in general that there are a lot of people who are willing to help, and it's a matter of putting yourself out there and attending as many events as possible now virtually if you can, and I'm sure you'll meet people who are willing to help you.
I just want to add from our research quickly that I think also just normalizing that fact that it might feel awkward or strange to reach out at first. I remember when I was starting out in my career as well, that just seems so daunting and intimidating. But I think if young people know that that's completely normal, that everyone else kind of feels that same way or has felt that way at some point in their career, could kind of help break down that barrier to reaching out to people in the industry.
A question for everybody: if you could kind of go back to yourself at the very beginning of your career and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be? And maybe I'll start with Perry.
That's a good question. I would say to myself to not be afraid to go back to school, because actually between the time that I graduated from McMaster's music program and going into Humber, I moved to Germany. I was trying to find a job with my music degree as a teacher, and I was unable to find something that satisfied me. And at the time, it felt daunting, like to come back to school, to move back home. And I think the narrative that we're fed is that, that life is linear, that you go to school and that's it, and you keep going, and it's one way, there's no way to turn back. But I want to say that, it's okay to go back, and going back to school was the best decision I'd made, because of course I'm happy about my music degree and I learned a lot from that. But the 7-month program at Humber was just incomparable, and it really set me on this path. There were like mandatory volunteer hours, a mandatory field placement, and through those field placements, I was recognized at an interview and I was hired for that job. And then it just became like a little avalanche of amazing opportunities in Toronto's industry. So definitely don't be afraid to go back to school or to do an internship or to do a training, because like the time will pass anyways. So you might as well do something that you love in that time.
What about you, Zareen?
I was muted. I think I would tell myself to sort of focus on what it is that I actually want to do and just do that. Because I think in my path, I had so many different like side hustles. Like I was like, yeah, I'll do graphic design, I'll do photography, I'll do this. And it's like, because we're in that culture of like, we need to have 5 different jobs or 5 different things that we're all monetizing all of them instead of just having some things be hobbies because you like to do them. And I think I would tell myself that is I wanted to work in film, and that's what I should focus on as like an actual career, and everything else it's okay to have as a hobby. Like it's okay to just be a photographer as a hobby and enjoy photography as something you do and don't get paid for. And that way you don't burn yourself out and you can actually focus on the goal that you have for your actual career.
That does seem like really valuable advice, especially sort of like given that side hustle thing that we talked about earlier. It's like not everything you do has to generate an income. What about you, Varun?
What I would tell myself back in the day, maybe 8-10 years ago, would be, to keep working hard, but not keep high expectations. I know that sounds a bit weird, but it's important to just keep working hard and not think about what this will lead to, because if you keep working hard and just do your best, then the right things will happen and it won't disappoint you. Often you work hard, but some things are not in your favor, and then you get disappointed and you feel put down. But it doesn't happen if you can balance. You choose to stay happy and keep low expectations. But you don't let that go in terms of your effort. You keep working hard, and that's a good thing because 8-10 years ago, when especially we are talking about Generation Y and Generation Z, we have been sort of at the receiving end of information. There's just so much information. You always feel like there's so much to catch up on. There's so much to learn, and then you have to remind yourself that you don't have to be on the top of everything. It's okay. It will come at the right time, right? So you just have to keep working hard, and things will just work out in the end.
And Rebecca.
When you first asked this question, I started brainstorming in my head, and my first impulse was to say, I wouldn't tell my younger self anything because I'm very proud of the decisions I made, and I was fearless and a little bit impulsive, but like I pushed forward, and I wouldn't change very much, I think. But I think thinking a little bit more, I think I would probably give my younger self the piece of advice that like nothing is more important than your health. And right now in conversations today, both in the United States and Canada, we're having lots of conversations about the ways crews are treated and the hours they work and the number of breaks they get. And it's a physically demanding industry. It even if you're working post-production, sitting in a chair all day, it takes a toll on your body, on your mental health, working in this field. And the only person who's going to advocate for your health is yourself. So that means getting enough sleep. It means eating a good diet and making sure that you're being fed well if you're being employed by somebody else. It means taking care of your body, and I probably could have prioritized that a little bit more when I was younger. And I think everyone across the board needs to center that question in their practice, in their work, just making sure that they're treating themselves the right way, because your body, there's nothing more important.
And it's hard to do that, especially when you're working at something you love and the work is demanding a lot of you. It's hard to sort of know when you need to prioritize those things. But it does seem like the pandemic has really been a moment to pause and reflect on some of what that work-life balance is, and sort of what's being expected of us in terms of those sorts of things. We're close to wrapping up. I would like to let everyone know that Katie has shared a link to the report. So if you want to read the full report, you're welcome to do that. And it's online and available. And then I guess I wanted to wrap up with Lauren and Julie and ask if there's anything from the research that really surprised you or really excited you that you want to share with everyone.
I don't know if there's anything from I guess listening to everyone talk, it's so reassuring to hear you guys are really going through the stuff that the research has showed us. What I think in the last conversation, we're talking a little bit about what you would go back and kind of tell yourself. And I think all of these things we're hearing not just from folks in the creative industry, but from folks across the board in all different sorts of industries. And I really do think that the last 18 months or so has made some of these sort of values of younger generations sort of permeate through society. And I'm hoping that, some things really do change, right? That there isn't this sort of one goalpost for a career, right? You can, as Perry said, have a little meandering, you can experiment, and there's not just one, definition of the success. And we are, as Rebecca mentioned, taking care of our health, right? And we're thinking about that balance. That's really encouraging to hear. And just to let you guys know that you are not alone in this industry, but it's out there everywhere.
Yeah, and for me, I think, a lot of times in the work that we do in researching young people, the way I hear them talked about in the press is that Gen Z is this really responsible generation. They have it together, they're going to change the world, which I definitely believe they're amazing. But I think the fact that we learned that, this mentorship thing, establishing that professional community is a real hurdle for them is something to keep in mind, that, they're still young and they do still need help. They need to kind of know how to find their people, and they do kind of need that, to build those relationships and communities, especially when it comes to work. So while they are amazing and have a lot of things together, they still do need some help from us in the industry that might be a little more experienced too.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to the Academy for presenting this panel. And I'm going to hand things back over to Katie.
Thank you so much. Hi again, everybody. Thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. I want to thank Perry, Rebecca, Varun, Zareen, Erin, Julie, and Lauren for today's conversation and for sharing their insights with us. And another thank you as well to our partners at Ontario Creates for presenting this session. As Erin mentioned, we have included a link in the chat to Ontario Creates and Vice Media Group's report, The Future of the Creative Workforce, if you'd like to read more about this, and we will include it in the follow-up email as well so that you'll have a copy. If you are posting about this event on social media, don't forget to tag us in your posts. We are at the CDN Academy, and Ontario Creates can be found at Ontario Creates. And also please join us for our next Academy Talks event, Academy Talks Close-Up Music Video Production, which is presented by Telefilm Canada and will be on Monday, October 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. On that panel, we are going to have a panel of past music video production and Prism Prize participants who will discuss what makes a strong video, getting started in the industry, getting your music video made, as we were talking about today, pairing music and sound, and much more. So that event is free for Academy members, and details can be found at academy.ca if you are interested. Thank you again, and see you again soon, I hope. Take care.